this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
How do you turn 16 games, injury reports, team notes, betting lines, and matchup trends into one clear weekend preview? ChatGPT Work can help. Give it the goal, plus real inputs like notes, files, data, and project plans. It can help turn them into an analysis tracker, deck outline, or workflow you can keep shaping. You stay in control, reviewing the work, and choosing the final result. Put ChatGPT to work on your most ambitious ideas and projects. Get started at chatgpt.com by selecting Work Mode. Available on Plus and Pro plans. Scams don't always look like scams anymore. AI can make a fake ticket offer look legit or a sportsbook text sound official. And once an identity thief gets your personal information, they can start using your name like it belongs to them. And then what? LifeLock helps detect potential identity threats and suspicious activity. And if identity theft happens, LifeLock's restoration specialists can help restore your identity, guaranteed, because only LifeLock truly protects your name and identity. Get LifeLock at LifeLock.com and use promo code FOOTBALL for up to 30% off your first year. That's LifeLock.com, code FOOTBALL.
Hey, JJ, my wife and I have been training for a half marathon, and on Saturday, we peaked at 8 miles. We're almost there at that full 13 and change. Everything hurt after. When's the last time you did something stressful?
That would be on Sunday when I didn't know if Ashton Jeanty was alive or not. I'm JJ, and over the last couple of years, I've been doing everything I can to be a best ball bro. And last season, things finally fell into place. I got 40th in the DraftKings Millie contest, taking home $20,000. Maybe I became a best ball bro, but I'm still looking to learn more about this game. And I still want others to come on this ride with me. So even if you consider me a best ball bro, this could be your year. This could be the year that you officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. We've partnered up with DraftKings again this year for Best Ball, and we've got a can't-miss offer on their biggest Best Ball contest ever. $20 million in total prizes. It's draft one, get one. Draft your team once, no weekly lineup management, and your top scorers start automatically each week, all season long. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app and sign up with promo code LATEROUND. Enter a lineup in the $20 million Best Ball contest for $25 and get a bonus ticket for a second entry. 2 shots at the title. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, joined, as always, by Rich Ryan. Rich, we're both wearing blue today. How you doing?
That's right, the Blue Boys. Well, I almost made another blue B alliterative joke, but this is a family show.
Yes.
Painful. Speaking of painful, yesterday, those couple of hours waiting to see whether or not Ashton Jeanty had a fantasy football pulse. Of course he was. Blood was flowing through his veins, but for our selfish purposes, our selfish purposes, we needed him to rise up like the Undertaker, and it sounds like he has.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, seems like, it was probably the best case scenario in those moments. I mean, I'm a little bit overweight on Jeanty, and I was drafting him a lot more in like July for some. I go through these like spurts of like drafting players a whole lot, and so I haven't drafted him a lot recently, but I am overweight, so I was sitting there being like, please, and I'm underweight on Mike Washington, and I'm like, please, Ashton, be okay. I need you this year. I need you, but. I break that down with our guest today in pretty good detail. A lot of game theory discussion. Probably the most game theory oriented guest that we've had on the show. We had him on I think last year, but we'll get to that in just a second. First, let's talk about some risers and fallers in ADP, Rich, because we're in this season now. I'm sure there's going to be one because we just got word that Kayshon Boutte was traded to the Texans. We are recording this. We usually record this part on Tuesday, but we're recording it on Monday this week. But Kayshon Boutte did get traded to the Texans, so I'm sure he's going to be a riser here, soon. But let's go over some risers and fallers because there's been a lot of movement in the ADP streets recently.
Yeah, let's start with Keenan Allen, somebody who you were drafting when he was a free agent, now on the Indianapolis Colts. And As of last week, he was starting to go in round 14. Are you still drafting Keenan? Are you just happy with your position? Where are you at with Mr. Allen?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm fine if I am getting a stack and he's there and there's, like, that range doesn't have a ton of like locked in great wide receivers. And, do I think he's locked in and great? Maybe locked in, but not necessarily like amazing. Like, I think that he's certainly lost a step. He's not that much of a down the field type player. But the one thing about Keenan Allen, man, is that the last 2 stops, he has been used quite a bit in his offenses. Last year, he had the highest target share among all Chargers wide receivers by a pretty decent margin when you look at it on a per route run basis. And then you look at the Bears a couple of years ago, he had a better target share than DJ Moore, and that was Rome Odunze's rookie season, and he had a better target share by a healthy margin over Rome Odunze. So I look at Keenan Allen as someone who's going to get you something. I actually had a good discussion about this with a guest as well today, which I'll just say it's Mark Garcia. But, I had a great discussion with Mark about sort of like the idea of taking zeros and not taking zeros, because I think a lot of guests have sort of gone with the idea that we shouldn't be taking zeros and that we should look for just as much floor as ceiling with some of the later round picks. But Mark kind of disagrees with that. So it's a little teaser for our conversation. It's a really good conversation. But with Keenan Allen, I think that he is a solid pick still in round 14. I would assume that he's going to go earlier in a lot of drafts. Obviously, this is ADP. So, and I've seen him go a lot earlier in drafts, but this is, looking at where he was before, it's still kind of catching up a little bit. So yeah, I mean, if you're getting him around 14, I think round 13 is fine. That's an area of the draft where things just start to go kind of south at the wide receiver position.
All right, let's stay out on the West Coast. Talk about a guy you just said you're a little underweight on, and that's rookie running back Mike Washington. There's a bit of noise, I think, in this week's data in terms of his ADP, of course, because of yesterday's craziness. But a couple of weeks ago, he was settling in around 187. So regardless, a rise for Mike Washington, who's looked electric in preseason. So why are you lower than the market, I guess, on Washington?
I haven't drafted enough of him for sure. Like I'm under 8% Washington, and I have regrets for sure based on where we're at right now. I didn't think that he had a terrible profile by any means. He actually had a positive draft capital delta in the ZAP model, which tells me that the model likes him a little bit more than where he was being drafted. It wasn't so big that it made him a low risk player, but it was on the positive end. The thing with Washington that's really weird is that the ZAP model inputs do like him more than some of the advanced numbers do. So I mean, some of the numbers in the ZAP model are advanced, but I mean, some of the stuff that you see like avoided tackles per rush, etc. So like he had a 62nd percentile reception share in his best season, a 65th percentile adjusted yards per team play, a 57th percentile adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt. So that builds you a picture of like, oh, this is a pretty above average, production profile overall. He was an older prospect, but even still, that doesn't look bad. And then you add on the fact that he crushed the combine. He had one of the best speed scores you're going to find in the ZAP model. I think Keith Marshall was the only one who had a better speed score in the model. I just can't remember completely. But regardless, the advanced metrics are where things start to get a little bit iffier and scarier for him, where he had a 12th percentile avoided tackles per attempt, a 22nd percentile explosive run rate, which is crazy because of what he did do at the combine, 16th percentile yards after contact per attempt. And he did split backfields throughout college. So part of the reason why I didn't go after him heavily is because, I just didn't think that necessarily if Ashton Jeanty went down, that Washington would be the for sure guy in that backfield. And I think that we were kind of seeing them talk and speak to this when they would talk about him after these big preseason games, where they would say that he was still working on some of the pass catching stuff. And they have Dylan Laube in their backfield too, who is someone who had a really good receiving profile coming out. And that's kind of the role that he would hypothetically play. So when the news went down, I didn't really send a take out there because I was kind of waiting for stuff to kind of come out. And I figured it would come out. I honestly thought it would be just a couple of hours. It ended up being like 6 hours, but I was kind of shocked by the RB2 placement of Mike Washington because we know that this environment is not elite, right? I mean, I love the system and I love what it could be, but it's not an elite environment. The reason we're drafting Ashton Jeanty is because he's going to get a ton of work on the ground, but he's going to get a ton of work through the air more than likely as well. Like that's the allure with Ashton Jeanty. If that piece was gone for a player like Mike Washington to let's say halved, right? Like if Mike Washington in a lead back role for the Raiders would be like a 6 to 7% target share player and Jeanty's double that, that's a huge difference. It's a huge delta. And so I couldn't get behind Washington in like the top 30-ish of running backs, but I think you could start thinking about him right after that just because there's a pretty big drop after that. Like I would still be drafting, again, this is not what came to fruition, but I would still be drafting like Ramondre Stevenson over Mike Washington, for instance, because I do think that their projection in general might be semi-close if Jeanty were out, but there's more contingent upside with Stevenson if Travion Henderson's banged up right now too. But if Travion Henderson were to go down. So he's looked the part in the preseason. There's not that much predictive value there though. So I'm not going to overstate what that all means. And there's been enough coach speak sort of that says that he still has some stuff to work on, that I don't think that he would just become a full-blown bell cow in that backfield. Regardless, I wish I was more in like the 8%, 9%, 10% range with Mike Washington as opposed to like the 5% that I'm at.
Contingent upside and better offensive environment, of course, for Ramondre, right? Right. Median outcomes project New England to be much better at scoring points than Las Vegas, which at the end of the day, scoring points is so important for the running back position. We'll stay with another rookie. This one you're a little more bullish on, especially more than his fellow rookie teammate. Let's talk about Kevin Concepcion.
Yeah. KC, man. I just think he's really good, and I've been drafting him. I think others should draft him. He's been rising. That's why he's part of this list right now, but I still think that he's at an okay price tag. I'm not really concerned about, I'm concerned about the quarterback play, but not specifically the fact they named Deshaun Watson as starter. I think that regardless of who's under center, it's not going to be great. But you could also argue that it's going to help some of the underneath stuff, because I don't think Watson can really get the ball down the field very effectively at this point. So yeah, this is just a reminder that Casey Concepcion, in my opinion, was I don't want to say far superior because that doesn't frame it properly, but he was definitely at least like a tier or two above what Denzel Boston is, in my opinion. In Boston, I do have some fear, to take a term from Matt Harmon, that there's a little sacrificial X to his profile this year. I do think that there's some upside with Boston. He's in that kind of like Cortland Sutton archetype. If you want to take that a step further, you get into like Tedero McMillan, then into Drake London, right? And so like there's that kind of archetype going on with Boston, but I think Concepcion fits what we really would want from a player in this offense, which is getting looks all over the field. They're going to manufacture touches for him. And, if you want to make, and I made this comparison whenever the draft happened, but this could be Todd Monken's like Zay Flowers in a way in this offense. So I'm pretty hype on Concepcion. I think he's a good prospect, and I'm concerned about the offense, but obviously if he were in a better offense, he'd be like a 7th round pick, not like a 11th round pick.
It's just so hard to play X in this league and be efficient from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, especially in a bad offense.
Yeah, you can't, not everyone's just Nico Collins. Go stand on the outside and dominate people. We want guys moving and getting spammed with easy targets. Another rookie, I'm curious to hear your take, because the steam continues for De'Zhaun Stribling, who's up 2 more rounds since the last time we talked.
Yeah, I get it. I understand it. I think that there's a lot of reason to click his name still. It's more so, though, I'm going to probably be a little bit more inclined. I'm trying to not let CLV get in the way too much, but I do want to, with like a May to through August contest, like the Millie, there's going to be a lot of teams that got Stribling in round 18, 19, 20, as opposed to round 9. And they're, I have another CLV conversation with Mark, but I don't think it's the end of the world if you're drafting him in round 9, but we're beginning to get into a place of like opportunity cost. Like I've definitely changed my tune on Stribling over the last month or two, just by doing a little bit more research and thinking about his positioning more on this team, while also obviously, reading into the hype and watching him. Like he's got very strong hands and he's very physical, and those things alone, and he can produce yak, and those things, in a Kyle Shanahan offense can work, that alone. The thing that I'm trying to be reasonable with is the fact that Mike Evans hasn't been playing, Christian McCaffrey hasn't been playing, and George Kittle hasn't been playing. And so obviously those 3 guys are going to be, more focal points of the offense than what Stribling's going to be. So I'm not against drafting him where he's still going. If he starts to creep up into, and look, again, like once you get into like round 6, as early as round 6, you start to get into very questionable wide receiver profiles, in my opinion. I'm certainly not saying that like he has a horrible ADP, especially from like a wide receiver standpoint, but I do like some of the running backs in rounds, 8 to 9, and some of the quarterbacks that go there. You can complete a lot of stacks. Even the tight ends at times will fall and you'll get a discount with them. So I'm not going to push it that much further than this, but if you're only doing 10 to 20 drafts or something and you don't have enough scribbling or whatever the case may be, I think it's fine to draft him, in this range because there's plenty of upside with his profile. He's still mega, mega, mega undervalued in season long leagues. Like, it's pretty crazy how little love he's getting in those on major platforms. So if you want to get your exposure and you're playing season long in that way, I'd probably do that, but you can still do it in best ball too.
We started the Risers segment with a veteran free agent signing, and like the Phoenix, all ends with beginnings. And we'll start and finish. Najee Harris signs with the New York Giants, and despite his fancy footwork in those videos online, he's only going in the 19th round.
Yeah, I mean, there was a tweet, and I can't remember who sent it, and so somebody can tag me, and I'll retweet it and give them love, because I'm not trying to plagiarize here. But someone made the point on Twitter where they said that Najee Harris coming off an Achilles isn't a big deal for Najee Harris because he didn't have any burst to begin with, right? Like he's the kind of player that this might not matter as much for, because having that like quick speed and acceleration was never really part of his game. I'll be honest, Rich, like I think Harris could have some role in this offense this year because he's a player that coaches seem to like. I mean, our sample size is obviously the Steelers with Mike Tomlin, who loved him despite Jaylen Warren being the better running back. And then look, I know that there's a skill to be able to handle a big workload, but there probably should have been more of a split with Jaylen Warren throughout Najee Harris's time in Pittsburgh. And then he goes to LA last year. And, I like Amarian Hampton as a prospect. And I thought that he actually wasn't as bad as some people think last year. But regardless of all of that, like Najee Harris was in store to probably see a decent amount of work in that backfield before he got hurt. And so now you look at this coaching staff in particular with Harbaugh and company, and it's kind of, a veteran staff. And I'm not going to be surprised if Najee Harris is just one player that they lean on and like more than what the fantasy masses want them to, in the way that we feel about that. So I still think Cam Skattebo is fine. I've cooled off on him the last couple of months, but regardless, like the last month or so, I think that we should bump him down a little bit from this. And his ADP has fallen a little bit from this, but it's not going to surprise me if Harris has some role. I've actually drafted him I haven't avoided drafting Najee Harris in the 19th, 20th round because I wouldn't be surprised if he just ends up playing as their RB2 this year.
And I mean, they're brothers, right? If John picked up the phone and asked Jim what it was like having him on the team in the running backs room as a player, if Jim didn't endorse it, John and the staff don't bring him into New York. Yeah. So there's something there. Let's talk fallers. And Kyle Monangai has this nagging injury, which seems like it is scaring a bunch of people off of drafting him. He's fallen a full round over the last week, but JJ, we know the money in best ball is later in the season, and perhaps a recovery might be in tune for Mr. Monangai. Yeah, man, this is what we were talking about last week, where I'm trying to not make too big of a deal out of the early season injuries. I do think that, DeAndre Swift, who got pushed up based on this news, he's like a mid 4th round pick now. I like Swift. I think that Swift is a good pick, but I'm still drafting Monangai when he falls. And sometimes he falls even further than the round and ADP, just because, obviously some of this data needs a little time to fully catch up. But to me, Monangai is still a decent enough click in a best ball environment. He's actually a better in best ball player, in my opinion, because I think there could be some unpredictability in your managed league, especially a shallower league for him, because there's not going to be that much pass catching upside, similar to how if you like a Chris Rodriguez or like a J.K. Dobbins or whomever, they're better in best ball type players. But yeah, I'm trying to not, this just goes back to what we talked last week. I'm trying to not overstate this early season stuff, because we could be looking at this in week 5 and being like, oh yeah, I forgot he missed weeks 1 and 2 or whatever the case may be. He might not even miss any, who knows? But I don't want to draft injured players. Don't get me wrong, but I am more okay with drafting injured players who have a timetable to return that
is early in the season when there's no bye weeks and we have players that can fill in for them in our best ball lineup. So I'm still drafting Monangai in my Bears stacks. Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at with him overall.
Final guy, Rachaad White. Everybody loves themselves some Bill. Yeah. Nobody loves themselves some Rachaad White.
I'm still drafting both of them. I do think that Bill has kind of like, just based on reliable beats out of Washington, sounds like that they're getting him more involved as a pass catcher, which is exactly what he needs. But look, in college, Bill's best season reception share, and he was an older prospect. In college, his best season reception share was 8%, which is really low. It's like a 22nd percentile number. And then last year, he had a sub 30% route share. And Rachaad White, in a non-full-time role last year, was still in the top 20 in route share at running back. So like, I still think that they're going to have a split backfield, and that's enough for me, especially in a best ball environment, to lean into the ambiguous backfield while also recognizing that these guys both might get and should get some usable weeks for this offense. Tunsil out regardless, So I think that this is the right kind of ambiguous backfield to attack because there are outs for both of them, and I think both of them have a very real chance of giving you a number of usable weeks in a best ball environment. Yeah,
totally agreed. In the rare times that I've gone 0-ish or waited a little bit on running back, I mean, in this PPR environment, someone like White is just such a nice click to be able to grab there in the early double-digit rounds.
For sure. All right, let's get to the guest. Mark Garcia, best ball analyst at 1 week season. He does work for StatRankings as well. It was a great conversation. You guys will definitely learn something. There were times where I had to like really focus. And now I know that people say this all the time about the late round podcast where they're like, sometimes I got to like really focus on the things that you're saying because it's just boom, 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 boom. And I felt that way with Mark sometimes where I'm like, I got to make sure I'm hearing what he's saying here because he's going very deep into the game theory world. And that's what this conversation was about. We talked about Ashton Jeanty. We talked about CLV. We had a very deep discussion about zero RB that was not surface level whatsoever. So hopefully you guys dig it. I really enjoyed talking to him. So without further ado, here is that interview with Mark Garcia. All right, Mark. So we had kind of this weird thing happen on Sunday where Ashton Jeanty was thought to essentially have lost his season, where he gets hurt. We didn't know if it was an ACL. We didn't know exactly how long he would be out for. Now we know that it was an ankle injury, but there was this 6-hour window where best ball drafts were going on and folks were drafting Jeanty as late as the double-digit rounds. Mike Washington was going as early as like round 4, round 5. My question to you is not necessarily specifically about the Jeanty and the Jeanty situation in the Raiders backfield. It's more when an injury like this occurs and there's this unknown window, this window of ambiguity. What is your game theory angle? And do you think that people are now today sort of making too big of a deal out of, oh, there are these Millie rosters out there and lineups out there that have Ashton Jeanty round 6 that just ruined the entire tournament?
Yeah. So 2-part answer, I guess, for a 2-part question, right? To answer the first part, it comes down to risk management. More broadly speaking, I think portfolio management. So like if you're a player that you just started drafting, like put yourself in a situation where like you just started drafting on Sunday afternoon and like you're going to use the last 3 weeks of this draft window to draft your entire portfolio, whether that's 20 drafts, 50 drafts, 100 drafts, however many you get in, but you didn't start until right now. So that's a different discussion than if you have been drafting since late May and you've seen the ups and downs of the cycle of ADP. You've gone through all the motions there. You've seen kind of how things have shaken out and you can adjust and basically adjust your own portfolio versus what has already happened. So 2 very different situations that would also require very different answers. So you kind of have to look introspectively and say like, where do I fit in that spectrum? And those are probably the 2 extreme examples, right? Mm-hmm. Where do I fit in that spectrum? How should I optimally approach this situation? So the answer is probably like, it depends, which is like everyone loves hearing that answer, but it really does depend on your own portfolio, how many drafts you're putting in. Say for me personally, if I'm putting in 500, 750, 1,000 drafts even, and I've been drafting since May, and I look at my Ashton Jeanty exposure level and I'm at like 6 to 8%, which I was a little bit below market. I would want exposure to later Ashton Jeanty. Now, how far that and there's so much variance and so much extra stuff that we can throw into that discussion, but that's really what it boils down to is like, where is your own risk management at for your own portfolio? Because it's not really a one size fits all answer. Like we could say, oh, yeah, we want to get exposure to Jeanty, but like if you just started drafting, you could say like, I see that I have 0 Ashton Jeanty. This is my first draft. Do I want to take on that additional risk of, say, taking an Ashton Jeanty in like the 6th round where he was at the 1-2 turn? It's over to your own like risk management. So it really comes down to each individual user. I'd say from a game theory backed perspective, we should want to lean into increased variance when the field is kind of shying away from that. We'll talk a little bit more about that too, because there's this whole discussion to be had about like what leads up to this discussion over the last 4 months. Yeah. But that's kind of the short answer. Now I forget what the second part of the question.
Well, no, so I've been having so many discussions recently on the show about CLV, and
right,
because I think on one hand, like of course we all understand, like you want CLV, of course you want positive and favorable CLV because that's going to help your portfolio. But then I see the reactions that I'm seeing on social media today, where there are people basically saying like those teams are the ones to beat because they got Ashton Jeanty in round 6. And, obviously he's banged up, but I want to hear your take on like why that response is probably just too extreme in general, with the way that things went down.
There is so much variance, and all comes like a lot of what we're going to discuss comes back to this buzzword, variance. There's so much variance in this contest that we're playing. You can't say with any shred of like certainty that having Ashton Jeanty in the 6th round is any more beneficial to having him at the 1-2 turn. We have no idea. And especially for playoff formats. Right. So your DraftKings, your BBMs, it's a little bit of a even more nuanced discussion for cumulative formats, where obviously you draft a team and you're playing for most points between weeks 1 and 17. But for playoff style formats, we have to understand that we really only have one way of measuring like success in this contest because we have such a small sample size. And that's really expected value. And the thing with expected value is there's a couple of assumptions that not a lot of people understand when we're talking about expected value. One, it assumes an infinite sample size. We don't have that. So like, who's to say that our expected value will have, like, even if we played this till we're 100 years old every single year and all these contests remain the same throughout that time period, like we still don't have a sample to say, I'm a good best ball player, I'm a bad best ball player. Like we just don't know. The second thing that expected value assumes is that all other players have a similar starting point to us. And we're going to get like heavy in the game theory here. The assumption of like, and I'll liken it to poker, and I hope this isn't too meandering of a discussion, but there's a lot to like.
No, I think that's important. Yeah.
The thing that we can measure being expected value, it assumes game theory optimal play. Now, with game theory optimal play, we'll liken it to poker, right? And that's my personal background in like the gambling spheres. Like I had my come up in poker. Started playing when I was 14 under my dad's name, which was like how I got my come up into this kind of sector of gambling. But in game theory optimal in poker, there are some assumptions. One being the infinite sample size. 2 being that everybody else that you're playing is also abiding by game theory optimal play. So then if everybody's on the same playing field, we can accurately analyze expected value, and we can accurately analyze if these plays that we are making are profitable or not. So loop that back to best ball. if we know for certain, and we know this in poker too, like not everybody is playing game theory optimal poker. If we know now that not everybody is playing theoretically optimal best ball play, that calculation for expected value is even more muddied. So those are two things fighting against us here to say, like, are we playing this game as optimally as we can? And now our answer is like, I don't know. Like, we don't have the sample. Variance is off the charts. So if we're talking about like a specific player or a specific situation as you cannot overcome that, like 6th round Ashton Jeanty, you can't say that. We have no idea. Yeah. And then you talk about like playoff style format contests, the variance is amplified that much further. Right. Like, is it one of 16 advancing from week 16 to week 17? Is it one of 12? Is it one of 4? All these things go into this calculation of expected value. Now, the one thing that we do know about expected value, and this is, we're able to calculate this, is where does the expected value from these contests come from? If we add it all up, about 80%, and again, this is going to change based on the format and how many people are advancing weeks 14, 15, 16, whatever the case may be, right? About 80% of our expected value in playoff formats comes from the combination of advancement rate and week 17. So if we know that those are the two most important things, we should, theoretically speaking, be focused on those two things the heaviest. Right. So there's a lot of talk this year and last year about like week 17 is all that matters or advancement rate's all that matters. Like, no, neither of those is correct mathematically speaking, but those are the two things that we can kind of control the most when we're putting together these rosters. So like, do we care about week 15 correlation and week 16 correlation and game stacking? Like, we probably shouldn't. Like, the math says we shouldn't. Like, that's how we get to week 17. Yeah. But the two things we should be focused on the most are advancement rate and then optimizing for week 17. So to say like 6th round Ashton Jeanty when, 75% of the field has 1-2 turn Ashton Jeanty, like, we just don't know, dude. Like, let's let the variance shake out. Let's play this game a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's, especially the playoff stuff is so key. And this is where I've been having a lot of discussion with people, especially, like Malik Neighbors is a great example of this because obviously folks were getting him at like late 4th for some of the summer into the 5th sometimes. And now he's not going there because we obviously know the end result. And like, I've dumbed it down to essentially saying, look, if Malik Neighbors has a great week 15 through 17 stretch and dominates there, you could argue you should take him 101, right? There's no telling that like he's a good or bad pick at that point. And there's also so many other variables in a 20 team on DK lineup that can influence this, that I do think that we get to a point of just like dumbing down what best ball is when we say, oh, other teams have Ashton Jeanty in round 9 now. Oh, I'm dead. I can't come back from that. But Jeanty's very easily able to have a dud, and it's similar to like even last year. I remember, obviously early round running back did great last year, generally speaking. But then you get into the playoffs, or like Saquon. Remember Saquon's great year a couple of years ago, and then you get into the playoffs, and like that first week of the playoffs, like he gave you a dud, and then all of a sudden a lot of those teams struggled because he was carrying those teams into advancing, and he was a big part of that. I shouldn't say he was just carrying, but he was a big part of it, obviously. Yeah. And so, it just goes into your point about variance and about the fact that like there are so many inputs here that I don't want to overthink. And this is my general theme this year. And maybe this is like kind of like underthinking it, but like I think CLV might be a little bit overrated from the standpoint of this. What variance is and what kind of CLV you're actually getting. Of course, we would rather be on the favorable side of CLV. Like, of course. And this is not like I joked earlier because I was a little bit underweight on like Neighbors. And I joked earlier, I was like, I promise you, this is not cope for the, the slight underweight with Neighbors, thinking that I could get Neighbors cheaper as the summer went on. But to me, it's just like I have a ton of Stephon Diggs, right? And I got Diggs in round 12, round 13. Yes, I'm at a slight advantage probably with that, but I don't think that we can definitively say one way or another that this is definitely just, the way that this season's going to go and that these lineups are just going to dominate. We just have no clue in the end.
Yeah, and let's unpack that through a theoretical framework a little bit more. When is the only time in ADP's life cycle that projections are influencing the numbers?
I mean, I would imagine throughout.
When they're set. So when the contest kicks off, that's the only time.
Oh, I got you. I get what you're saying. There.
Yeah, sorry, that was probably framed a little poorly.
No. I get no. You're right. I mean, ADP is. You're saying ADP is framed when projections are originally set, and that's the framework that we're working off of.
That's
right?
the only time throughout,
right.
From late May to September,
right,
where the ADP numbers are mathematically influenced solely by projections.
Correct. Right.
After that, it's heavily industry sentiment, player inputs,
right. Beat
writers.
Yeah.
That it influences all that stuff. So if we look at like the life cycle of ADP, and we like to think that it approaches more what in game theory framework we say Nash equilibrium, which is like the most perfect state of balance where no player can gain an appreciable edge over another through any action. So, and we know that ADP never reaches Nash equilibrium. So like it's never perfect, but we like to think that as it approaches September, ADP becomes more accurate. Even that thinking, that framework of thinking is a fool's errand, because we are so far removed from that ADP structure having any mathematical basis that it doesn't matter. So like within that discussion, if we look at closing line value, like, yeah, we want to think, because like we think we have control over this stuff as humans. Like we want to be like, this is my comfy area. I beat closing line value. Yippee, woohoo. Like there's all this variant stuff that still has to happen. Like during the season, before the season, injuries, and we can talk about all the variance stuff a little bit heavier later, but like closing line value means next to nothing. Mm-hmm. And like there have been, and I don't want to poo-poo on the good work that has been done in best ball to describe closing line value, but that's exactly what it is. It's descriptive in nature. It's saying that these rosters that finished top 0.1% or top 10 or however we want to work out that sample size, we're describing what those rosters had in common referencing closing line value. Yeah. So it's completely descriptive in nature. It is 0% predictive. It doesn't mean anything to us. It just means that like we are able to capitalize on ADP fluctuations in a plus EV manner.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do think that gets lost in a lot of this is how and why ADP is moving the way that it's moving, right? Without really thinking through like, is this a mathematically sound reason as to why this is happening right now? Or is it simply, I mean, if you draft throughout the summer, you see the ADP shifts just based off of a hamstring injury that we know will be fine. You know, right. Look at like Mekhi Lemon right now, for instance, or, maybe you don't want to go the rookie route. I think the more interesting example of this is like the Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks stuff that's going on right now.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty extreme example.
Yeah, where like we start the summer and Chuba Hubbard has an ADP above Jonathan Brooks. Obviously, there's this Jonathan Brooks injury stuff that we're getting more and more confident because he's just playing. But I think that in most outcomes, Jonathan Brooks would have just been playing and not gotten hurt just based on where, things were at. But regardless, like even after the Chuba Hubbard injury that recently happened, and even though the timetable was pushing him like at week 1, the gap in, and this is where it's interesting because like season long, you're not seeing this gap at all. I mean, it does not exist in a season long environment. It's the reactive best ball brain that this is really happening more. But on DK, you'll get Jonathan Brooks at the end of round 6 from an ADP perspective now, and Chuba Hubbard's a round 11 pick, right? Yeah. And I'm not even a pro Chuba analyst. Like I think that there's a lot of to like about Jonathan Brooks, and I was drafting him a lot and I was in on it. But there comes a point in time where it's very clear that some of the shifting in ADP is very just vibes based and based on what some of the news items are saying, as opposed to what does this actually mean? Like, what is this doing? What do my projections look like, as you noted? Whatever the case may be, how are we logically thinking about where this player should go? What I'm wondering right now is like how much more efficient your drafting would be if you do anchor a little bit more towards that like initial ADP look, right? Because if that ADP is more anchored on what our projections are saying, and there's going to be plenty of cases where like we're shifting projections just based off of like news items and stuff like that, or whatever the case may be, like just, health or what have you. Like obviously Malik Neighbors, we're shifting our projection on because Malik Neighbors is now seemingly a lot healthier than we thought back in May or something like that. Right. But I do wonder, because I haven't done enough analysis. Like we do a lot of analysis on like the end ADP, right? End of August ADP and what that looks like. But seeing the shifts and how much more predictive or less predictive that really is, I think is something that we should at least keep in mind while we're drafting.
Within that same discussion, this is really the first year where like things like AI is really coming into play. We've had AI around for 3-4 years now, but it was never something that we could confidently train yet. We'll phrase it like that. Now we have the ability to train an AI to think how we want it to think. And within that, we can feed it starting ADP. We can feed it injuries that happen. We can say like, hey, we'll go back to the Carolina backfield example. We can say the projections probably started as 65-35 to 60-40 in favor of Chuba Hubbard as far as workload split went. We can now say, let's shift that to 55-45 in favor the other way and say, project this out, rank them, give me a new updated ADP, see where that settles. I can guarantee you it's not going to be a complete flip-flop of their ADPs from Chuba Hubbard in the 6th round and where he's now at 11 and the other way around, like from probably 14 Jonathan Brooks started, like 14th round, something around there. Great. Yeah. And now he's up to the 6th. It's probably going to have them both settle if we just went purely by projections and we can feed this engine to learn like us. Now we can say like, that's probably going to put both those backs in the 7 to 8, 9 round range, right? That would be the game theory optimal answer of when we want to be targeting those players.
Right.
There's more variance and stuff that we can talk about that goes into this discussion too, but this is now something that we can do. Like this is where we are in 2026 as far as AI goes. So if you wanted to simply every single day have an AI repopulate an ADP based solely on projections, and remove all the noise from the industry, from the talking heads, from everybody that's playing this game, we can do that. And that would probably, if we were playing Game Theory Optimal and everybody else was playing Game Theory Optimal, that would probably be what we wanted to do and draft based on that ranking.
I do want to ask you too about some of these more unknown commodities that have been getting steam, Dejon Stribling, Jacoby Lane. Could throw like a Caleb Douglas in there. A lot of these rookie wide receivers, even like, a Pat Bryant, Dontavian Wicks, they've been rising a little bit as well. In these cases, are you leaning into the hype? Are you afraid to lean into to their rising ADPs, or is it just like a case by case thing for you? Like how do you view, those sort of cases of these unknowns rising?
It's a case by case basis with one specific caveat for me. And that specific caveat is late round wide receivers have an extremely low hit rate in best ball. We know this. This has been proven. So, I mean, it's like Puka Nacua and nobody else. The hit rate is extremely low. And when we're talking hit rate, we want like league winner stuff. When we're playing best ball, we're not talking about like Jacoby Lane returns 14th round value and he was being drafted in the 17th. Like that doesn't do much for us. We want like world beaters. We want and that's what we need to be targeting in the later rounds. Like, I think this is a key mistake that the field is still making is like, we want to have that semblance of control in this game that has so much variance. So we play it safe in the later rounds. We should be swinging for the fences. And when we look at the historic hit rates of wide receivers coming from rounds 15 to 18, and we can say, you can frame that whether that's where they start in ADP or where that's where they finish. Like, it really doesn't matter. I would say it's probably more accurate to frame it when ADP is released based off initial projections. So that encompasses all the names that you just listed off. So knowing that The hit rate of wide receivers found in that range is extremely low. Again, talking about like players that actually make a difference in best ball. I would say it's probably futile. It's just blanket statement. It's probably futile to be chasing those players up.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that is historically, where do like world beaters value come from? What positions in the 15th to 18th round? It's running backs and tight ends.
Right.
So I just kind of blanket statement want to be targeting running backs and tight ends at a heavier frequency in those later rounds, which by extension means that I don't really want to be chasing those wide receivers up. Now, there's this like, I know better or I know best, like human mentality where even I fall victim to it, which is like, oh man, Deshaun Stribling's pretty fucking good, dude. Like I kind of want a little bit there. So I think it's fine. I would say that not all of those players are created equal. Let's just compare like Dontavian Wicks to Deshaun Stribling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is the ceiling case to be made for each of those players? Stribling's, and it'll probably take a lot of stuff going his way. He has a lot of aging skill position players surrounding him on that offense, right? Mike Evans, 33, George Kittle, 32, 33, Christian McCaffrey, 30. So the path to like pure ceiling outcome is probably a little bit more straightforward for a guy like Deshaun Stribling, where Kyle Shanahan offense, if things go right, Deebo Samuel gets hurt, Mike Evans gets hurt, George Kittle is, coming back off an ACL tear or Achilles injury. It's probably a little bit cleaner and clearer case for the pure upside for a guy like Deshaun Stribling compared to like Dontavian Wicks, where it's like we've seen him be really, really efficient on a per target basis, right? But he's still, there's a reason that he was not a heavier snap rate player in Green Bay.
Sure.
He doesn't do like the down and dirty stuff as well. Directly compare that to Deshaun Stribling, who is one of the more polished, like all around wide receivers come out of this class. He's able to get in the trenches. He's able to block for runs. He's able to do all that nitty gritty stuff that you have to kind of do in a Kyle Shanahan offense. Going back to like Puka Nacua, which we brought up earlier, like he did all that shit really well too, coming out of college. And there's a reason why he was on the field a lot more than we thought he would be. It's because he did all that other stuff right. But yeah, so just directly comparing, like I would want to chase a guy like Deshaun Stribling a little bit up more than a guy like Dontavian Wicks, even Jacoby Lane. His path to pure ceiling is probably a lot more muddied, just comparing the two directly.
So you said something in there about kind of chasing ceiling and going after those like league winning types. So I'm curious how you feel about the notion that has definitely been pushed, especially like me talking to best ball bros on this show or, just interacting with people on social media. But the idea of not drafting zeros late in your draft, right? This notion of like, you want somebody that's getting you something. So therefore, I don't want that to mean that like those people are saying chase floor. I don't think that that's necessarily the true outcome of what they're stating and saying. But I do think that someone listening to this might want to hear your take on that because it seems a little bit different than what others have generally said about not taking those zeros.
And I know exactly what you're talking about. And again, the reason for that notion is more descriptive in nature. It's saying, let's see what has worked over the 5 seasons of best ball data that we have. And it's like, okay, sweeping generalization here. We see that taking zeros is harmful for where it matters the most in the playoff rounds.
Mm-hmm.
It also influences, taking zeros heavily influences your advancement rate. So we know that advancement rate and week 17 are the 2 highest contributors to expected value, where all the money is made in these contests. If I flip that mindset and say, we are playing these contests to win the entire thing, right? And this is coming from DFS background here, it's kind of akin to a 50-50 mindset or a cash game mindset versus like a GPP mindset.
Mm-hmm.
If the goal is to have a 40% advancement rate and just let variance handle the rest, I think it's fine to say, I don't want to take zeros in the later rounds.
Yeah.
Because that's where that comes into play. It comes into play in advancement rate. And that's fine. Like we still don't know what we want to be optimizing for outside of
what's
what
optimal
tells us. So if I flip that into my GPP mindset, it is where can I or how can I absolutely lap the field? How do I position myself, my portfolio, the individual rosters in my portfolio to have the highest upside to go and win this thing?
Mm-hmm.
And that is shooting for the outlier stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So my frame of thinking is I want to be okay leaning into variance a little bit more, especially in the later rounds, and take those home run shots. Because if we think of an 18 player roster or a 20 player roster, as we have on like Drafters and DK, we have the ability to absorb some of that miss or some of those misses.
Right.
We have, we're playing 9 players on a weekly basis. We have double that plus on each roster that we put into play.
Yeah.
So bringing that kind of full circle, giving a specific example for this season, like my late round targets are almost all running backs and tight ends.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be putting myself in the position to make the most if I am right. And the way to do that is to look at the data. Where do league winners from the later rounds come from? Most often from running backs and tight ends.
Yeah.
I'm okay taking misses. I want to be swinging and understand that that's going to influence my advancement rate a little bit and be okay with that. So like everybody should have their own answer to this question or this discussion. Yeah. It should come down to your own personal risk management and how you want to be optimizing your portfolio. Now, all of that comes with the caveat that we have to have basic like roster construction down, because none of this theory stuff matters if we're like drafting 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds, or we're not taking, or we're to like take 2 quarterbacks in the first 10 rounds. You just don't do those things. You can't and be profitable. So all of that comes with the obvious caveat that like we have to understand how to most profitably construct these rosters that we're building.
Well, my follow up to that is actually something that I wanted to chat with you about, and that's obviously general strategy. But let's skip the general strategy of like what's going to work this year and just go straight into zero RB, because that's kind of a strategy that will then dictate a lot of the other strategies that you might take in best ball in general. And your answer to the last one makes me curious of if you are going heavy zero RB right now this year as a both, what hits late, or, you've done research and it shows that, obviously late round running backs and tight ends are going to give you much better hit rates than late round wide receivers, which then in turn means, well, in the earlier rounds, does that mean that you are going more zero RB? And is that also, so that's the first part. But then the second part of that is this also a zig while others zag type situation, because we are seeing running backs get pushed up a little bit more in the best ball environment?
One word answer, yes. The rest of that discussion is a little bit more nuanced. So zero RB is going to be much more beneficial to playoff formats because in cumulative we don't have a 14-week window as being round 1. We don't have the additional fluff in there built in. We have to be performing. Right. We have to be performing at peak performance for 17. So zero RB is less viable in cumulative. And I say less, there's still a semblance. There's still room to take some swings. We have to first understand like what zero running back was built for.
Agreed.
And it was built to harness the injury variance at the running back, or just blanket statement again. running backs historically have been injured at a higher rate than any of the other skill positions in the NFL. Now, that's what zero RB was built to harness, that injury variance. We look at the past 3 seasons, and running back injury rates are way down. What has been the highest injury rates over the last 3 seasons? Quarterback and wide receiver. So to say like zero RB is dead is just completely missing the mark of, one, what it is, and 2, the injury variance that has been associated with recent history. Mm-hmm. So zero RB is absolutely not dead. And if the field is using it at a lower frequency than historic tendencies, we should want to at least be drafting zero RB as much as we were 4 years ago, if not more. Yeah. To leverage those field tendencies. So, and I would say, again, it's a little bit more beneficial to us in those playoff style formats where we have the additional slop to make up for, 1 or 2 down weeks at the running back position within a 14-week window. But, we had we dipped our toes in on Sunday with the Ashton Jeanty stuff. That could have been a massive thing. And it still could be. We really don't have we don't know what the injury is. It started off being, we think it's a knee, and then it was lower leg, and now it's ankle. I don't know. The truth is in there somewhere, but we don't have test results. We don't have anything official from the team. So we still don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty there. But we look at Mike Washington. Why was he stuck in rounds 17 plus for so long? There are others. Ray Davis, Marshawn Lloyd for a long time until Josh Jacobs, I think
Big B for a while. Yeah.
Right. A lot of stuff going on there as well. But, the Braylon Allen types, the backs, the Kalon Blacks and whoever the other guy is, JJ.
Jordan James.
Jordan James, yeah. That archetype of back in a backfield where we would expect them, because whether it be depth behind them or coaching tendencies, we would expect that back to fill kind of a lead back, at least 1A type role if the starter went down. That's where a lot of the upside comes from in zero RB, in late round who we're targeting. So those are the guys that I want to be adding to hero builds, to zero running back builds, to builds that I don't know, modified hero running back is a thing now where it's you take 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds. I don't know, dude. We're just trying to pigeonhole this into labels, right?
I know.
That's a discussion on society, I think, more than anything, but putting a label on everything anyway. But yeah, so those are the types of players that I want to be targeting as an RB 3 on a roster. And if I'm drafting zero running back, I probably want to have a Tajay Spears type, a Woody Marks type, somebody that is going to get me something more than a 0, because the variance associated with these backs that we're talking about is anywhere from a 0 to, a workhorse running back, pending injury stuff. So I want to be kind of, if I'm attacking zero running back, hero running back, modified hero running back, whatever the case may be, drafting 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds and then not touching the position until rounds 12 plus, which I think is the most accurate description of modified hero running back there is. If I'm drafting like that, I want to then take into account roster construction, because if I'm taking hero running back approach, you want to ensure that the rest of the positions on your roster are elite. So how are we doing that in today's NFL? That means you must have one of the top 3, we'll say, if we want to extend it to Colston Loveland, tight ends. You want to have difference makers at the other positions. I want to have Josh Allen, Colston Loveland in the rounds 3 and 4. I want to have top wide receivers stacked on this roster. I want to have depth at wide receiver. The archetype of wide receiver that I'm taking in the later rounds is going to be more boom bust. It's going to be a wider range of outcomes guy, because I want that ability to attack elite ceiling at the other positions and let the injury variance at running back kind of take over. So long again. I led with the one word answer, but like I want to be leaning into zero running back. I want to be leaning into hero this year. I want to be doing these things that have historical proven hit rates that are at a frequency greater than what the field is utilizing.
Yeah, I think that you also bring up a good point. Two things. One is obviously the playoff versus cumulative formats, right? With a zero RB. Again, to advance, you have to be top 2 out of 12, right? Which is really not, and this is another thing that I've been trying to kind of talk through with folks on the show this summer is like, I think there's this idea that to advance, your team has to be really, really perfect, right? But it's more so that your team has to be in a really good spot in the playoffs themselves, as opposed to getting through. It's a 1 in 6 chance, which isn't like, obviously it's a higher end outcome, but it's not like super crazy. You don't have to have like every right player through week 14 in order to get that team advancing, right? And so to your point here, that alone also lends itself a little bit more to the ability to do zero RB, because if you hit on one running back, let's say through that point in time, or you hit on one running back through the first like 10 weeks, and then those final 4 weeks right before the playoffs start, maybe you get that second or third one because injuries pile up, whatever the case may be. And you've got the momentum going into the playoffs, but maybe you barely sneak into the playoffs, which is what we've seen so many times anecdotally with a lot of these best ball teams that then do really, really well, right? That win or whatever, is this like idea that your team is not totally, you didn't smash weeks 1 through 14 because you don't have to. That's not where you have to smash. You're trying to smash in the playoffs and specifically in week 17. And so with a zero RB type build or like a hero RB type build, and you're just trying to like find that RB2, I do think that it is very important to shout out that like these playoff formats are where that can happen in a more consistent way, because it is a 1 in 6 shot to just get in there. And then once you're in there, a lot of stuff can go a certain way. So I think that's a really good point. And the other thing I wanted to throw out there is you make a great point about archetype drafting and the way that people think, like when I go and I draft, I think you kind of like people who like have been playing fantasy football for a while kind of just do this inherently. But if you go running back, like if you're in the back half of the first round and you get James Cook and then you turn around and you get Kenneth Walker or something, right?
Yes,
Whatever
sir.
the case may be,
It's a good pairing.
which would be great. Yeah. Which would be an awesome start. I would love it. Right. And so if you have those two running backs, I'm no longer thinking about the Tajay Spears types like I would otherwise. Right. I'm thinking about the Kalen Blacks, the Ray Davises. Well, maybe not Ray Davis with James Cook necessarily, but regardless, you get the idea. So like, I think that's another really good point to drive home, is that when you are sort of constructing this lineup, don't just think about like the floor running backs that you were noting, a Woody Marks, who is going to get something, but probably doesn't have like the most massive ceiling in the world. Or, some of these like early down, not big pass catching profile type backs like a Dobbins or a Chris Rodriguez or whomever, who to me are probably better in best ball than they are managed, because in a managed league, it's just going to be chaotic and trying to predict when that production
when the touchdowns happen.
Yeah. Right. And so like those players though, I don't know, have crazy great maybe there's some contingent upside, sure, but even still you have to think about what would happen if that starter goes down. And I don't think that there's that much of a difference in delta between spending up 6 extra rounds to get a Chris Rodriguez for if an injury were to happen to Bashal Tutin and the backfield, and maybe Rodriguez isn't the best example, but the backfield then opens up completely, versus a round 19 running back like Kalen Black or Jordan James, thinking about the one outcome that could happen for one of those two backs to emerge of Christian McCaffrey going down. I mean, if we assume that Tutin and McCaffrey were both down, are we really sitting here saying that we would confidently know that Chris Rodriguez is a better fantasy asset than one of the two 49ers running backs? Like, I don't think that we can confidently say that we would go one way or another. So you can get the discount and get those guys if you're looking for just that injury out, as opposed to just getting some production, right? Which is going the Chris Rodriguez. So you're paying that premium for some production, but you don't need to pay that premium if you've already locked down your supposed RB1, RB2 in the early rounds, right? 100%. I think it's a really, really important thing to at least, get across, because it's something that I think a lot of people don't actively think about, even though if they do it kind of inherently and internally as they're drafting.
There's one player I think that highlights how the field is getting that so wrong throughout this season, running back wise, and that's Tank Bigsby. So like he started in the 17th, 18th round, right?
Yeah.
And then like Saquon started missing some time, and then reports happened that like they're going to try and get Tank Bigsby like a weekly workload, and his ADP shot up to like 13th, 14th round. It's like in a best ball setting that the 5 to 7 touches that he's going to get, even like if he is spelling Saquon, means absolutely nothing to our roster.
Yeah.
He is, his value is as a pure handcuff. So like, why was he moving up into the 13th, 14th round? He shouldn't have been. So I had a ton of Tank Bigsby like early on in the draft cycle. And then his ADP kind of skyrocketed a little bit because of all the uncertainty around Saquon, or, you know, they have Sean Mannion coming in. Is he going to look to spell Saquon a little bit more? And now it's like, okay, no, Saquon's back at practice and he's the workhorse. And now Tank Bigsby is dropping again. It's like his use to us in a best ball setting never changed. So we should have been drafting him just as that elite handcuff guy.
Right. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. That is a really good example. I want to ask you what you think. You know, you kind of hinted at, like, I mean, I guess you could technically throw what we just talked about into this bucket, but what you think best ball drafters get wrong.
The biggest thing that I have seen that the best ball community is still getting wrong is drafting statically throughout the entirety of the draft window. So if, again, we've used this buzzword a lot today in our discussion of variance. If we think about, you know, when the contests that we're drafting open versus when they close, there's a sliding scale of variance within that structure as well. And it's this time information variance equation. So when contests kick off in May and we have 4 months of off season until the regular season starts, and then we have 17 weeks of the regular season, that level of variance is so much higher than if you're drafting in early September. The issue that I see, generally speaking, from the field is they're drafting in May as they would in September. And that is one of the biggest mistakes I think that we can make. So back to the zero running back discussion, I could tell very, very early that the field was like completely shying away from zero running back. And this was back to last year as well, right? Based off the recent injury trends that we noted. So what is zero running back? It's a highly variant way of drafting. So where would I want to institute that at the highest degree? When the variance is greatest. So that is right when these contests kicked off. So like a massive chunk of my zero running back rosters in my portfolio were drafted in the first month of the off season because that is where the variance was highest. There's still 4 months for somebody to get injured before the season even starts.
Yeah.
And then there's the 17 weeks of the regular season as well. Yeah. So bringing that discussion like full circle, like the field is drafting, you know, broad, again, blanket statement alert. The field is drafting in May as they would in September. And I think that's a massive mistake.
Yeah, that's a very good point about, especially zero RB, just going back to the discussion we just had, but there's stuff that can go down as the summer goes on. I think that there could be pushback of, and I'm curious what you would think about this. I'm just trying to think of like a counter, you know, just to see but like would be, hey, it's May and you're drafting the zero RB team. So that means that you're relying on running backs that we don't know what their roles might be, even the backups, right? So I would assume that the response to that, this is a devil's advocate thing. This is not me necessarily believing that, right? My stance would be, and I want to hear if you agree, is that there's inherent variance to that aspect of things, like who steps up. Like right now, we've been talking about the San Francisco backups, right? Like we don't even know how that would play out, but that doesn't mean that you can't find that guy in May when you're drafting and you're getting him probably for a price that is lower anyway because we don't have that information. Is that sort of how you would answer that?
And I have it within that zero RB portfolio. Like I had probably 50-50 exposure to like a San Francisco backup. If they were on a roster, I probably had 50-50 exposure to both Jordan James and Kalen Black. They were the two guys most likely to step into that role. I had no idea. And we still really don't have that much of an idea. It looked like it was Jordan James before he got hurt. And now it looks like it's Kalen Black because he's been on the field.
Right.
But like, we really don't know still. So kind of like just saying, if I'm drafting 100 rosters in May, June timeframe, I would probably want 40% of those, and this is just how I've handled it, I'd probably want like 40% of those rosters to be like 0 running back. And I was probably targeting San Francisco backup on 25% of those rosters. So again, 100 roster portfolio, 40% of them being 0 running back, a quarter of those being San Francisco backfield backup. I probably have like 5 Kalen Black and 5 Jordan James shares in that portfolio. And again, this is like, I don't know what my actual numbers are, but like from a mindset standpoint, that's kind of how I'm looking to attack it.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. All right, we've covered a lot. We're not even going to get to everything that we were potentially going to cover. So I'll leave it at this. Give me a bold take. Put your crazy variance hat on. Give me a bold take for this 2026 season.
Michael Mayer will win somebody a tournament.
I love that. I love that because I've been clicking his name a lot at the end of drafts.
Dude, I put that out in the Twitter sphere in like May and got like all the pushback. I think my words exactly was Michael Mayer probably carries the highest upside of any round 20 pick. And everyone was like, no, dude. But if you think about it, and like we know that the Clint Kubiak system is going to be heavy personnel heavy, as in they're not going to utilize a lot of 11 personnel. And then you look at the state of their wide receiver core. It's like he's going to be on the field already. Then what happens with this 32 out of 32 ranked wide receiver core? If like something happens to somebody that we don't even want to consider being like having an injury, but like, what if something happens, ahead of him on the depth chart? What if something happens to Ashton Jeanty? Like we're here. There's a lot of upside there with Michael Mayer that I think people are brushing off.
Yeah, I completely. I mean, look, I think we're going to get usability out of him regardless of anything happening. Period. Yeah. Like in that offense, like you said, we're going to see enough 12 in that offense. With the lack of pass catching talent, and then upsides there if something were to happen to a lot of these guys. Obviously, specifically a Brock Bowers. Yeah, man, that's a great take. I love it. This was a great conversation. I love being able to hear, your brain spew some game theory knowledge. And I know that others will love it too. So let everyone know where they can find you and what you'll be working on this season.
Yeah, man. On X or the Twitter sphere at HiloFF, HILOWFF. In season, I shift promptly to DFS from the Best Ball Streets. Most of my work is going to be found over at oneweekseason.com. And just this season, I started working with StatRankings.com. If you're looking for a stat provider, highly recommend going and checking that out. If you want to go check it out, again, this is a service that was just launched last year. I was brought on to kind of help make it like the best stat provider service in the industry, and that's my goal. So if you have any like recommendations, hit me up. And if you want to give it a try, use code OWS, Oscar Whiskey Sierra. That'll get you 20% off, and you can check out everything we have to offer over there, dude.
Awesome. I love it. As always, everyone, make sure you check out lateround.com. The draft guide's out if you need that for your season-long drafts upcoming. Otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.
Some people use ChatGPT to answer questions. Others use it to get real work done. With ChatGPT Work, you bring the goal, plus real inputs like briefs, notes, files, feedback, data, and project plans. It can help turn them into an analysis, tracker, deck outline, prototype, or workflow you can review and keep shaping. You stay in control, giving direction and choosing the final output. Put ChatGPT to work on your most ambitious ideas and projects. Get started at chatgpt.com by selecting Work Mode. Available on Plus and Pro plans.
There are exciting things happening at your local CVS. Shop new extra big deals with Extra Care every 2 weeks. No coupon needed. Plus, get access to exclusive sale prices, personalized deals, and more as a member. Extra Care is the way to save at CVS. Join for free online or in-store and start saving. Visit your local CVS store or cvs.com/extra big deals for this week's deals.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.